The dawn came slowly to Ekiti village, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Pestles struck mortars in rhythmic thunder as women pounded yam for the morning meal. Goats bleated near compound gates, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster called out late, as if it had overslept its duty. Then the drum spoke. Not the gentle talking drum that announced births or marriages, but the deep ceremonial drum that lived in the chief's compound and only emerged when the village faced something that could not wait. Its voice rolled across the clay-roofed houses, through the narrow paths between compounds, past the cassava farms and the boundary stones that marked where one family's claim ended and another's began. Women stopped pounding. Men paused at their doorways. Children froze mid-play. The drum spoke 3 times, then fell silent. Within moments, voices rose like startled birds. At the well, 2 women dropped their buckets and began speaking rapidly. Near the palm wine bar, men who had been laughing moments before now stood with furrowed brows. An old man hurried past, moving faster than his knees usually allowed, his walking stick striking the ground with purpose. "They are dividing the land," someone said. "No, an investor is coming. The road will pass through. The government wants to take the farmland for a school. They are evicting families who cannot prove ownership." Each rumor carried its own terror, but they all pointed to the same truth. This meeting would decide who stayed and who lost everything. In a village where land was not just property but identity, history, and survival itself, such a gathering could reshape lives in an afternoon. The sun climbed higher, and still the rumors multiplied. At the far edge of the village, where the footpaths became narrow and the compounds grew sparse, Adiz knelt beside a small fire, stirring a pot of watery soup. The wrapper around her waist had been torn and re-sewn so many times that its original color was a matter of speculation. Her feet, bare and cracked from years of walking unpaved paths, bore the map of every hardship she had endured. Her hands, calloused and rough, moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make much from little. 3 children sat nearby on a woven mat, watching the pot with a particular intensity of hunger. They were not hers, not by blood. One was her late sister's son, abandoned when illness took his mother. Another belonged to a woman who had run away with a traveling trader, leaving the child with whoever would feed him. The third had simply appeared one morning, thin and silent, and Adiz had not asked questions. She fed them when she had food, which was not every day. The sound of running feet made her look up. A boy from the next compound, Emika's youngest, appeared at her doorway, breathing hard. "Mama Adiz, you have not heard?" The drum called. "Everyone must come to the square. The chief is making announcements about land." Something cold moved through her chest. She stopped stirring. "Land," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mama. They say people without proper papers will lose their homes. My father is already at the square." The boy peered at her with concern. "Will you come?" Adiz's hand trembled slightly. She set down the stirring stick and stood, her knees protesting. The children watched her with wide eyes. "Eat slowly," she told them. "I will return." She moved toward the corner of her small hut where a clay pot sat, half buried in the ground and covered with an old cloth. Her fingers worked at the fabric, then reached inside. Beneath layers of dried leaves and old wrappers, her hand found the folded papers, brittle now, yellowed at the edges, but still intact. She had not touched them in 3 years. Not since the last time she tried to speak at a compound meeting and had been laughed out of the gathering before she could finish a sentence. The memory rose sharp and immediate, her husband's relatives surrounding her after his death, shouting that a woman with no male children had no voice. Their faces twisted with contempt as they told her to leave the family compound, to take her shame elsewhere. When she tried to mention the land her husband had left to her, they spat at her feet. "What land? You think a woman owns anything? You are nothing. You have always been nothing." She had left that day with only the clothes she wore and these papers, hidden in the folds of her wrapper. She had built this small hut at the village boundary, where the land was considered cursed by some because it sat too close to the forest. She had lived here in silence, growing what she could, taking in children others had discarded, speaking to no one unless spoken to first. Now they were talking about land again. About ownership. About proof. Adiz looked down at the papers in her hand, then at the children eating their watery soup. If she went to the square, they would mock her. If she spoke, they would silence her. If she produced these papers. She folded them carefully and tucked them into the inner pocket of her wrapper, where they pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The children watched her as she moved toward the door. "Will you come back, Mama?" the smallest one asked, his voice uncertain. "Yes," she said, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. The village square was already crowded when Adiz arrived, and she knew immediately that she had made a mistake in coming. The space was arranged like a living diagram of power and position. At the center, beneath the ancient Iroko tree that had witnessed generations of decisions, sat the carved stools reserved for elders. The chief stool remained empty, larger than the others, its back decorated with symbols that spoke of authority passed down through bloodlines. The elders who had already arrived sat in careful hierarchy, the oldest near the chief stool, the younger ones arranged by wealth and influence. Men of importance stood in the second circle, close enough to be heard if they chose to speak. Behind them, other men filled the space, their bodies creating a wall of presence and voice. The women stood at the back. Most remained standing, though a few elderly ones had been allowed to sit on mats spread on the ground. Children darted between legs and compounds, not yet old enough to understand that what happened here today might determine whether they had homes tomorrow. Adiz moved toward the women's section, her eyes down, her steps small. She could feel the weight of attention even before anyone spoke. Conversations faltered as she passed. Heads turned. A woman she had once borrowed palm oil from looked away quickly, as if eye contact might be contagious. She found a space at the very back, near the path that led out of the square, and stood there with her arms crossed over her chest, trying to make herself smaller. The wait seemed endless. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered beneath wrappers and on foreheads. Men spoke in low voices about the rumors, about what the chief might say, about which families had the strongest claims. No one looked at Adiz, but she could feel the awareness of her presence spreading through the crowd like ripples in water. Then the chief arrived. The crowd rose as one, a wave of bodies straightening. Chief Okonkwo moved slowly, his wrapper richly dyed, his walking stick carved from a single piece of mahogany. He was not an old man, perhaps 55, perhaps 60, but he carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had held power long enough to know its weight. Two younger men flanked him, their faces serious with the importance of their proximity to authority. The chief took his seat. The crowd settled. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. "People of Ekiti," the chief began, his voice carrying easily across the square, "we gather today because a matter of great importance has come before this community. You have heard rumors. Some true, some false. I will speak plainly, so no one can claim they did not understand." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "There is a development company from the city. They wish to build a road through our village, a road that will connect us to the highway, that will bring commerce and opportunity. But they require land. Not all land. Not even most land. But they require certainty about which land belongs to whom, so that compensation can be paid fairly." Murmurs rose and fell like wind through grass. "Therefore," the chief continued, "we must settle, once and for all, the question of ownership. Every family with land in this village must prove their claim. If you have papers, bring them forward. If you have witnesses, let them speak. If you have neither—" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, its implication clear. Adiz's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hand moved unconsciously to her side, feeling the papers through the fabric of her wrapper. "We will begin with the western farms," the chief said, "and move east. When your name is called, step forward. The elders will hear your claim." The process began. One by one, men stepped forward with documents, some official, some merely scraps of paper with names and boundaries scratched in fading ink. Some had elders who remembered their fathers farming the land. Some had brothers who swore to the validity of their claims. The crowd listened, and the elders conferred, and decisions were made with nods and murmured agreement. Adiz watched it all, her throat growing tighter with each declaration. She recognized the pattern. Men spoke, elders listened, land was confirmed or contested. Women's names appeared only as wives of dead men or daughters of fathers, never as owners in their own right. Time passed. The sun reached its highest point and began its slow descent. Hunger gnawed at stomachs, But no one left. This was too important. This was survival. Then, finally, inevitably, the process reached the eastern boundary of the village. The land near the forest edge, one of the younger elders announced, reading from a rough map. There is a hut there now, but the ownership is unclear. Who claims this land? A man stood immediately, Obina, who owned 3 compounds and had been trying to expand his holdings for years. He was tall, well-fed, his wrapper clean and his sandals new. That land belonged to my uncle, Obina declared. He could not farm it because of the poor soil, but it is family land. The woman squatting there has no right to it. Adiz felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands clenched at her sides. What woman? The chief asked, though his eyes had already found her at the back of the crowd. The widow, Obina said, not bothering to look at her. The one with no name that anyone remembers. She built a hut there like a refugee and thinks that makes it hers. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable. Adiz heard it like stones striking flesh. She tried to step forward, but her legs would not move. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Let her speak, one of the older elders said, his voice carrying a note of weariness. Even a squatter has a right to explain herself before we remove her. The crowd parted slightly, creating a narrow path from where she stood to the center of the square. Every eye turned toward her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their assumptions, their contempt. She took one step forward. Then another. Her bare feet pressed into the dust, and she focused on that sensation, trying to anchor herself to something solid. Before she had taken 5 steps, a younger elder, Ikenna, who always sat close to the chief and spoke often about tradition, rose from his stool and held up his hand. Wait, he said loudly. Why are we wasting time? This meeting is for people who own land, not people who rent their shadows. The laughter this time was louder, sharper. Someone near the front made a theatrical gesture of shielding their eyes, as if looking at her was difficult. A child giggled, and the sound was picked up by others until a wave of cruel amusement washed through the square. Adiz stopped walking. Her face burned. Her hands trembled so violently that she had to press them against her sides to still them. Please, she managed to say, her voice barely audible. I have. She has nothing, Obina interrupted, his voice booming with confidence. Look at her. Look at how she lives. Does this look like a landowner to you? More laughter. A woman near the front, someone Adiz had once helped when her child was sick, turned away and whispered something to her neighbor. They both smiled. Enough, the chief said, but his voice lacked force. He looked tired, annoyed by the disruption. Woman, if you have something to say it quickly. We have much to discuss. Adiz's hand moved to her wrapper, toward the papers hidden there. But before she could reach them, Ikenna spoke again. With respect, Chief, this is improper. We are discussing matters of land ownership, serious matters. Landowners are speaking. Widows without sons should be listening, not interrupting. The words hit like a slap. Adiz's hand fell to her side. Around her, heads nodded in agreement. Even some of the women at the back looked away, their faces carefully neutral. I think, Ikenna continued, warming to his theme, that this woman has confused permission to exist on unused land with actual ownership. It is an understandable mistake for someone of her circumstances. But we cannot let confusion slow down important work. Remove her from the square, Obina said flatly. She is wasting our time. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The chief said nothing. He simply gestured with one hand, a small movement that nevertheless carried absolute authority. 2 younger men moved toward Adiz. They did not touch her, that would have been too direct, too obvious, but their presence and their forward movement made the command clear. Go, one of them said, not unkindly, but firmly. This is not your place. Adiz looked at the chief. He was not looking at her. She looked at the elders. Most avoided her gaze. Only the oldest one, a man so ancient that he rarely spoke anymore, watched her with an expression she could not read. She looked at the women at the back. Not one met her eyes. Someone spat on the ground near her feet. She heard it clearly, the deliberate sound of expulsion, of rejection, of disgust. She did not see who did it. She did not need to. Then a handful of sand arced through the air and struck a wrapper, leaving a red dust stain on the already dirty fabric. This time she saw the thrower, a young man, barely 20, grinning at his own boldness while his friends laughed. "Move, Mama," one of the men beside her said again, more insistently. "Do not make this harder." Adiz turned. Her vision had narrowed somehow, the edges going dark, so that she saw only the path ahead of her, the narrow opening between bodies, the way out of the square, the escape from this humiliation. She walked. Each step felt like wading through deep water. Behind her, conversation resumed immediately, as if she had never been there at all. She heard Obina's voice rising again, making his claim, describing boundaries. She heard the elders discussing the poor quality of the forest edge land, the difficulty of farming it, the question of whether it was even worth the trouble of formalizing ownership. "The woman can stay there if she wants," someone said with a laugh. "Who else would live in such a place?" "She should be gone by sunset," Obina replied. "Once my claim is approved, I will expand my cassava farm. She can find somewhere else to build her refugee camp." Adiz reached the edge of the square. Her legs were shaking so badly now that she thought she might fall. She stopped beside the boundary stone, one of the ancient markers that ringed the village, carved with symbols so old that no one remembered what they all meant. She put her hand on it to steady herself. Then she turned back, just once, to look at the square. No one was looking at her. The meeting had moved on. She might as well have never existed. Inside the circle of elders, the process continued with renewed efficiency. Obina presented his case with confidence, describing his uncle's historical claim to the forest edge land. Two men nodded in support, offering vague memories of conversations decades old. The elders conferred briefly, their heads close together. "It seems clear enough," Ikena said. "The land is unused and unclaimed. Obina's family has the stronger connection to that boundary area. We should approve his claim and move forward." "Agreed," another elder said. The woman was clearly confused. Perhaps someone should explain to her that she needs to relocate before the road construction begins. Hands reached for the approval, for the confirmation that would make it official. But before the chief could speak the words that would finalize it, a tapping sound cut through the conversation. It was soft at first, so soft that only those nearest heard it. Then it came again, more insistent. A walking stick striking the ground. The oldest elder was standing. This was itself remarkable. Namdi was perhaps 80, perhaps older. No one could say for certain. He had been an elder when the current chief's father held the position. His eyes had clouded with age until he could barely see, and he spoke so rarely at meetings that some younger villagers doubted he could still speak at all. But now he stood, leaning heavily on his walking stick, and the tapping of that stick commanded silence more effectively than any shouted order. "Namdi," the chief said, respect in his voice. "Do you wish to speak?" The old man's head turned slowly, as if tracking sound rather than sight. When he spoke, his voice was thin but clear, carrying the particular authority of someone who has lived long enough to remember what others have forgotten. "A question," Namdi said. "Before we approve this claim. A small question." "Of course, elder," the chief replied. "The original trust documents," Namdi continued, each word placed with care. "The ones filed with the local government after independence, when we first registered village lands officially. Who signed those?" Silence fell, a different kind of silence than before. This was the silence of confusion, of uncertainty. Ikena frowned. "Trust documents? I am not sure such documents exist for this land, elder. It was never formally registered." "Oh, but it was," Namdi said softly. "I remember because I witnessed the signing. It was during the dry season of—" He paused, his brow furrowing with the effort of reaching back through decades. 1978. Or perhaps 1979. The year the missionary school closed. The elders exchanged glances. The chief leaned forward slightly. "Elder Namdi, with respect, that was many years ago. Perhaps your memory—" "My memory," Namdi interrupted, his voice taking on an edge, "is clearer about the past than any of yours, since you were all children or not yet born. The land near the forest boundary was registered in trust. I remember because the process was unusual. The buyer was unexpected. Who? Obina demanded, his confidence faltering slightly. My uncle. Your uncle sold it, Namdi said simply. He needed money for a debt. He sold it to someone who paid cash, good money, from the sale of cocoa lands in another village. The registration was handled quietly because... He paused, his expression troubled. Because the buyer was being threatened. By men who did not want a woman to own land. The word woman fell into the silence like a stone into still water. What woman? The chief asked, though something in his voice suggested he was beginning to understand, beginning to feel the ground shift beneath his certainty. Namdi's clouded eyes turned in the direction Adiz had walked. The one you sent away, he said quietly. Adiz Okafor, daughter of Ease Okafor, who owned the largest cocoa farm in the southern district. Wife of Chitty Okafor, who died of sudden illness 12 years ago. Mother of 2 children who died as infants. Each fact landed with weight. Names. History. Reality. When her husband died, Namdi continued, his family drove her away from the compound. They took everything, the house, the farms, even her cooking pots. They claimed she had no sons, therefore no rights. She had nowhere to go. But she was not without resources. She sold her inherited cocoa land, the land her father left her, and used the money to buy the Forest Edge property. She came to me because I was the only elder who would witness a woman's signature on a land document. The square had gone absolutely still. Even the children had stopped their playing, sensing something significant happening though they could not name it. She registered the land in trust, Namdi said, to protect it from being taken. The trust was meant to be administered by the village council, with her as the primary beneficiary and decision-maker. But she never brought it before the council because... He paused, his expression sad. Because she knew she would not be heard. So she has lived quietly, hoping not to be noticed, hoping to be left alone. Obina's face had gone pale. That cannot be true. There would be records. Documents. There are, Namdi agreed. In the local government office, filed under her maiden name because she was afraid of her husband's family. And if I am not mistaken, she carried a copy with her today. All eyes turned to where Adiz had been standing. The space was empty now, except for the faint impression of bare feet in the dust. She came to speak, Namdi said, his voice heavy with reproach. And you sent her away. The realization spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Conversations erupted, loud, panicked, disbelieving. Men who had laughed at Adiz now looked at each other with growing horror. Women who had turned away from her whispered urgently behind their hands. This cannot be true, Ikenna insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. A woman does not own land. It is not our way. Our way, Namdi replied, does not override written law. The documents were filed legally. The land is hers, whether you approve or not. But we approved Obina's claim, another elder said, his voice rising with panic. If what you say is true, then we have just given away land that was never ours to give. Not yet, the chief said sharply, his mind working through the implications. The approval has not been finalized. We can still... He stopped, understanding flooding his face. The entire eastern boundary. That land extends. It extends, Namdi confirmed, from the forest edge to the market road. Roughly 15 acres. Some of it is farmland now, cultivated by people who assumed it was communal property because they never saw anyone claim it. But it is not communal. It is hers. Then half this village is built on her land, someone whispered, and the whisper carried to every ear. The panic was complete now. Families who had farms on that boundary, who had built additions to their compounds, who had planted trees and dug wells, all of them suddenly facing the possibility that they had been occupying property without permission. And the road project, the development money, the compensation that was supposed to flow to the village, all of it would have to go through the woman they had just humiliated and expelled from the square. Find her, the chief said, standing abruptly. His carefully maintained dignity was cracking, his voice sharp with command. Find her now. Bring her back to this square. 3 young men scattered immediately, running in the direction Adiz had gone. The crowd's attention split between watching them go and turning to each other with expressions of shock and recrimination. "How could we not know?" someone asked. "She never said anything," another replied defensively. "She tried to speak today," a woman's voice cut through, sharp with accusation. "We laughed at her." Silence fell again, this one thick with shame and fear. They waited, the sun burning overhead, the minutes stretching. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others stood frozen, as if afraid that moving might make things worse. Then the young men returned, and Adiz walked between them. She moved slowly, her head high now, though her eyes remained carefully lowered. The crowd parted before her, not mockingly this time, but with genuine uncertainty about how to behave, where to stand, what to say. She walked to the center of the square, to the space directly before the chief's stool. This time, no one told her to stop. No one laughed. The silence was so complete that the sound of her bare feet on the packed earth seemed loud as thunder. She stopped a respectful distance from the chief and waited. Chief Okonkwo looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw the torn wrapper, the cracked feet, the calloused hands. He saw the way she held herself, not with arrogance or triumph, but with a weariness that spoke of decades of endurance. He saw, finally, what he should have seen from the beginning, a woman who had survived everything they had taken from her and had asked only to be left alone. He stood. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, he removed his chief's cap, the symbol of his authority, the mark of his position. He held it in his hands for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, he knelt. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The chief did not kneel to anyone. It was unthinkable. It broke every rule of hierarchy and tradition. But he knelt now, in the dust, before this woman they had called nothing. "Adiz Okafor," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square, "we have wronged you. I have wronged you. We did not listen. We did not see. We judged you by your circumstances and assumed we knew your worth. We were wrong. I ask, on behalf of this village, on behalf of these elders, on behalf of myself, please forgive us." The words hung in the air. People held their breath. The wind moved through the iroko tree, rustling its leaves, but otherwise the world seemed to pause. Adiz stood silent for a long moment. Her eyes, which had been lowered, slowly lifted to meet the chief's gaze. What he saw there made him flinch, not anger, though that would have been justified. Not triumph, though she had every right to it. But something deeper and more painful, a bone-deep exhaustion, the accumulated weight of every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being made to feel invisible. "Forgive you," she repeated, her voice quiet but clear. "You ask me to forgive you?" "Yes," the chief said. "Please." "Tell me," Adiz said, and now her voice carried an edge that made people lean forward to hear better. "Would you be kneeling if you did not need my signature on the road project papers?" The chief's face flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Would you have sent someone to find me, to bring me back, to apologize," she continued, "if the land meant nothing? If the development company was not involved? If there was no money at stake? Adiz. If power had not exposed you," she said, her voice rising slightly, "you would still be laughing." The accusation landed like a physical blow. The chief remained kneeling, but his shoulders had stiffened. Around them, people looked at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at the scene unfolding before them. "I remember," Adiz said, and now her voice shook, not with fear, but with something raw, "the day I tried to speak at my husband's compound after he died. His brothers surrounded me. They told me a woman with no male children had no voice. They told me I was nothing. I tried to tell them about the land my father left me, the land I had rights to. They spat at my feet." She turned slowly, looking around the square, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. "I remember coming to the market 3 years ago, trying to sell vegetables from my small garden. A man kicked over my basket. He said widows who did not remarry were bad luck. No one helped me pick up the vegetables. Children stepped on them while laughing." Her hand moved to her side, where the papers pressed against her ribs. "I remember today. Standing at the back of this square, holding papers that proved my ownership. Trying to speak. Being told that widows without sons should listen, not interrupt. Being told I was wasting time. Having sand thrown at me like I was a dog to be chased away. She pulled the papers from her wrapper now, holding them up so everyone could see. The documents were yellow with age, folded and refolded until the creases were nearly torn through, but still intact. Still legal. Still proof. You did not apologize because you were sorry, she said. You apologized because you were afraid. The chief remained kneeling, his face ashen. No one spoke. No one moved. Tradition, Adiz continued, her voice bitter now, is what you called it when you excluded me. Our way, you said. But tradition is just another word for power when the powerful use it to keep others silent. You tell me you were blinded by tradition, but that is a lie. You were blinded by comfort, by the ease of not questioning, of not seeing, of not caring about people who have no voice to demand your attention. She looked at the chief, then at the elders, then at the crowd. Respect that is forced is not respect, she said quietly. It is fear wearing the mask of courtesy. The chief finally spoke, his voice rough. What would you have us do? Do? Adiz repeated. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was tired. I want you to understand that I did not come here today seeking revenge or power. I came because I heard that families might lose their land, and I thought, perhaps foolishly, that I should be part of that conversation. I thought that even if they did not respect me, perhaps they would respect the law, the documents, the proof I carried. She folded the papers and placed them back in her wrapper. I was wrong, she said. You respected nothing except power. So now you kneel, and you apologize, and you ask forgiveness. But I cannot give you what you ask. Please, the chief began. I will not sign any papers for your road project, Adiz said, her voice firm. I will not approve any land transfers. I will not make decisions about property that affects this entire village until things change. What changes? Ikenna asked, his voice tight. What do you want? I want, Adiz said slowly, new rules. I want women allowed in village meetings, not standing at the back, but seated among the elders, with voices that are heard. I want widows protected by law, not just by tradition that can be ignored when convenient. I want children who have no families to be the responsibility of the village, not just of whoever has a soft heart and an empty belly. She paused, letting the demands sink in. I want these things written down and posted in the square, she continued. I want them announced at every gathering. I want them taught to children so that the next generation does not grow up believing that poverty equals worthlessness, or that women are voices to be silenced. And if we agree, the chief asked, if we make these changes, then I will consider, Adiz said carefully, what to do about the land. But understand this, I will not be rushed. I will not be pressured. And I will not forget that this change came only because you had no other choice. The chief remained kneeling, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, shame, anger, resignation, calculation. Finally, he nodded. It will be as you say, he said. The village will change. Stand up, Adiz said quietly. Your knees must hurt. The chief rose slowly, his joints protesting, his dignity in tatters. He put his cap back on, but the gesture seemed hollow now, the symbol of authority diminished by the understanding that true power had been elsewhere all along. This meeting is ended, he announced, his voice rough. We will reconvene in 3 days to discuss the implementation of the new rules. Until then, no land decisions will be made. People began to disperse slowly, as if waking from a dream. They moved in small groups, speaking in hushed voices, glancing back at Adiz who still stood in the center of the square. Some faces showed shame. Others showed resentment. Still others wore expressions of calculation, already trying to determine how these changes would affect their own positions. Obinna, who had claimed her land so confidently, walked past without looking at her. His shoulders were hunched, his confident stride replaced by something more cautious. The women who had stood at the back now watched Adiz with a mixture of emotions, awe, fear, hope, uncertainty. One of them, an older woman who had once borrowed oil from Adiz and then ignored her today, stepped forward hesitantly. Adiz, she said quietly, I am sorry. I should have. Save it, Adiz interrupted, not unkindly, but without warmth. Sorry changes nothing. Actions change things. Be different tomorrow. The woman nodded and stepped back, tears in her eyes. Slowly, the square emptied. The sun had moved considerably since the meeting began, casting long shadows across the packed earth. Adiz remained standing in the center, watching them go, her face unreadable. Finally, only old Namdi remained, standing near his stool with his walking stick in hand. He tapped his way slowly toward her, his clouded eyes somehow finding her exact position. "You did well," he said softly when he reached her. "Better than I could have hoped." "I did what I had to do," Adiz replied. "But I do not feel victorious, elder. I feel tired." "Yes," Namdi agreed. "Justice often feels like exhaustion. But you have begun something important today. Do not let weariness make you doubt that." "They will resent me," she said. "They will find ways to make life difficult." "Some will," Namdi admitted. "But others will remember this day and be grateful that someone finally spoke truth to power. And the children will grow up in a village that is different because of you." Adiz was silent for a moment, then asked, "Why did you speak, elder? You could have stayed silent. It would have been easier." "Because," Namdi said simply, "I am old enough to remember when this village was different. When we made decisions as a community, not as a hierarchy of who could shout loudest or who had the most sons. I am old enough to be ashamed of what we have become. And I am old enough to know that silence makes me complicit." He tapped his walking stick against the ground. "Also," he added with a slight smile, "I witnessed your signature. I remembered. And memory, sometimes, is the only power an old man has left." Adiz touched his arm gently. "Thank you, elder." "Do not thank me yet," Namdi said. "The hard part is still coming. Changing laws is one thing. Changing hearts is another." He turned to leave, then paused. "The children you feed," he said. "The orphans and the abandoned ones. They will remember that when they had nothing, you gave them something. That memory will matter more than you know." Then he was gone, tapping his way slowly out of the square, leaving Adiz alone beneath the Irako tree. She stood there for a long time after everyone had left, her hand resting on one of the carved stools that had held an elder that afternoon. The wood was warm from the sun, smooth from decades of use. How many decisions had been made from these seats? How many voices had been heard, and how many had been silenced? Finally, she turned and walked toward the path that led to her small hut at the village boundary. Her feet followed the route automatically, but her mind was elsewhere, tumbling through everything that had happened, everything that had changed, everything that remained uncertain. As she walked, she noticed small differences. A woman sweeping her compound stopped to nod respectfully as Adiz passed. A group of young men who might have mocked her yesterday now stepped aside, their eyes averted. A child stared at her with something that looked like wonder. She was not sure she wanted to be wondered at. She had never sought attention or power. She had only wanted to be left alone, to feed the children who needed feeding, to survive in peace. But peace, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as silence. Peace could not exist in a place where injustice thrived unchallenged. Perhaps she had been wrong all these years, choosing invisibility over confrontation. Perhaps silence had not protected her at all, but had only delayed this moment, making it inevitable that someday she would have to speak or be erased entirely. When she reached her hut, the 3 children were waiting outside, their eyes wide with questions. "Mama," the oldest one said, "people are saying things. They say you own the land. They say the chief knelt to you. Is it true?" Adiz looked at their faces, thin, uncertain, hopeful. They were always hopeful, these children. Despite everything life had taken from them, they still believed that tomorrow might be better than today. "It is true," she said finally. "But it is also complicated." "Will we have to leave?" the smallest one asked, fear in his voice. "Will they make us go away?" "No," Adiz said firmly. "No one will make us leave. This is our home." She knelt down to their level, ignoring the protest of her tired knees. "Listen to me," she said. "What happened today, it changes some things, but not everything. We still have very little. We still have to work hard for every meal. But now, perhaps, we have something we did not have before." "What?" the middle child asked. A voice, Adiz said. We have a voice that cannot be completely ignored. And voices, used carefully, can be more powerful than fists or titles or fancy wrappers. She stood and ushered them inside, where the fire had gone cold and the soup pot sat empty. Come, she said. Help me restart the fire. We will eat, and tomorrow we will see what tomorrow brings. As the children gathered kindling and she struck the flint, Adiz's mind returned to the square, to the chief's kneeling figure, to the shocked faces of the crowd. She thought about Namdi's words about justice feeling like exhaustion. She thought about the changes she had demanded and whether they would actually materialize or would slowly erode under the pressure of old habits and comfortable power structures. She thought about the papers in her wrapper. Proof of ownership, yes, but also proof of how much could be taken from a person, how easily someone could be reduced to nothing in the eyes of a community that chose not to see. And she thought about the boundary stone where she had stood, her hand pressed against its ancient surface, as the village meeting continued without her. That stone had been there for generations, marking the edge of the community, the place where belonging ended and exile began. She had lived her whole adult life on that boundary, neither fully inside nor completely outside. Perhaps that was changing now. Or perhaps she would always live on the boundary, marked by what had happened, by what she had survived, by the choice to speak when silence would have been so much easier. The fire caught, small flames licking at the dried grass and twigs. The children huddled close, drawn by the warmth and the promise of food. Adiz began to stir the pot, adding water and the few vegetables she had left, making something from almost nothing, as she had done every day for years. But tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow the village would wake to a world slightly different than yesterday. Women would remember that one of their own had stood before the chief and refused to bow. Children would hear stories about the poor woman who owned the land and made the powerful kneel. Men would have to reconsider their assumptions about whose voice mattered. And perhaps, slowly, painfully, the village would begin to learn what she had learned through bitter experience. That power built on cruelty is always brittle, always vulnerable to truth, and that the people you choose not to see are often the ones who see you most clearly. The soup began to bubble. The children's faces relaxed into something like contentment. Outside, the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Adiz ladled out small portions into cracked bowls and handed them to the waiting children. They ate slowly, savoring every mouthful, and she watched them with a feeling that was not quite happiness but was perhaps the beginning of hope, tentative, fragile, but undeniably real. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The village elders would test her resolve. Some would try to find ways around the demands she had made. Others would quietly support her while publicly maintaining distance. The road project would remain in limbo, creating pressure from the development company, from the government officials, from everyone who stood to gain from the construction. But tonight, in this small hut at the boundary of the village, a poor woman and 3 orphan children ate watery soup and were warmed by a small fire, and that was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything. If this story touched you, please help me. Don't just watch and scroll away. Drop a comment, even if it's just your country or city. That one comment tells YouTube this story matters.